All right, here we go. Adopt Responsibility, episode 1. Man, this is so fun to be sitting down together and actually doing this. This has been an idea for a really long time. Even the idea of the basis, what we want to accomplish with this, and even the name. We've had a lot of things in place for a while, but yeah, we're finally both in a time and a place where we can carve out time in our schedules and make this happen. So really fun to be doing this. And let's just start with, I would love to ask you why you are so excited to be doing this and what Adopt Responsibility means to you.
Yeah. Okay. That was 2017. I remember starting to think about this, like what it could mean to have some sort of a public reach. And 3 years. And I pretty much have felt like the whole time the same way I feel now, which is like, I don't know if I'm ready to actually like forthrightly step out and say anything, because all I really have is like questions. And so it's like, even this podcast is just meant to be a way of us exploring and learning. But like you say, right now, we've both felt this is the right time to, take that step, make it public, and see where this takes us. Man, I'm excited. I'm excited to start this because 3 years, it's been a lot longer than that you and I have been developing ideas about the world, developing our worldviews, developing ideas of how to grow as men, grow as people. And in that time, we've both become dads of 2 kids each, and we've undergone many transformations. So I think really, honestly, even now, sitting here starting this podcast, I still feel like pretty much all I have is questions, and all I want to do is explore, and all I want to do is learn. And I almost know absolutely nothing about anything. But the one thing I feel like I do know is that strip everything else away, you're left with like any interpretation of the world you need, without even answering every little question. You need to do something, and you can't do nothing, because this world, first of all, we're all going to die. This world is suffering. This world is brokenness. And so you can't do nothing. You have to do something. And of anything that you're going to do, I think that I feel the most comfortable with exploring the idea of taking responsibility for that brokenness, and in whatever ways that you can, personally, in your family, in the world, to take responsibility, to take ownership for the things that you can. And then beyond that, to adopt responsibility for things even beyond the problems that I've caused. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So true. I was just explaining to, just sat down in the studio and getting to know the guys who run the place. And he was asking what we're doing. And I was telling him, like, me and my buddy have been on a journey, like everybody else in their life, but in our early and now mid 20s. I'm about to turn 27 this year. And so I guess that's almost counting as like late 20s. And I just think, looking back over my 20s so far, I'm like, man, there's so many things that I'm so happy with. There's so many things that I would absolutely do over again. And then there are also so many things that I'd probably do differently. And so for me, my biggest dream for this is to facilitate conversations, both with us sitting down together, but then we're planning also to interview other people, me one-on-one and you one-on-one with other people, to just help on that journey of growing up into manhood. And of course, if you're a woman listening to this as well, more than welcome to be a part of what's going on here. And in the audience, of course, we'll interview.
And to become a man.
Oh gosh. No, thank you. It's a crazy thing, like growing up and taking on new levels of responsibility. Like when we first met each other, were you 18? I was 19. We both just showed up in Hawaii to do this school with Youth with a Mission. And Yeah, a lot's gone on. A lot has changed since then. A lot of life has happened for both of us. A lot of new layers of responsibility have been added, and it's a weighty thing. And I think a lot of people end up getting crushed by those pressures that come with taking on new responsibility. And so, my dream is for us as we're continuing ourselves in this journey of adopting new areas of responsibility, always starting with ourselves. Like that's the baseline is, taking responsibility for ourselves and then moving out into our families and beyond that into our, extended family, immediate community. And then, you just build out from there, like, bigger circles of people you're involved with all the way to national and then, global scale of taking on.
Right.
But I think a lot of people.
And then intergalactic.
That's why we have Space Force now, right? That's what Space Force is for. Adopting responsibility into the outer reaches of the galaxy.
That's like the subtitle of the podcast now. Boom.
It has to be for sure. But yeah, I think a lot of people, myself included, in that situation I'm describing, we show up and we're still teenagers and I'm thinking like, I want to change the world. I want to, I'm showing up and I think I know way more than I do. And think I have everything way more together than I really do. And it's funny even now, like, as you're saying, I still feel like a lot of what I have are just questions, topics that I need to understand a whole lot more about. And so I think it's part of what we're doing here is being lifelong learners and just being really real and honest about where we're at in that journey. And yeah, big hope for me is anybody who follows along with this and listens in or watches on YouTube or whatever, can see our conversations and the interviews we're going to have with other people. And, if they're a few years younger than us or just in some stages of life that we've just come through, to be aware of everything that's going to go on in these conversations before they take those few steps through their early 20s, mid 20s. That'd be amazing, and I think everything that we're going to do here is going to be incredibly helpful for shaping perspective and building humility and work ethic and be a voice in somebody's life that's going to help them to have that mindset of taking responsibility first for themselves and then adopting responsibilities in layers out from there.
Yeah, that's so good. You've made me think of a few things. First, like what you're talking about, that process of taking responsibility for things and worrying about the things that are actually in your control is so key. And it's like the difference between somebody who, for probably less than virtuous motivations, would criticize huge sections of the world, global issues, like issues of that have to do with millions of people and the way that millions of people live. And, things that come to mind are like people who protest huge issues in other lands or who protest huge issues that happen globally. Whether they're justified or not is secondary to, like, that's not their realm of influence. That's not their realm. It's just not the proper mode of being to attack things at that level, to go instantly to the most, distant and unpersonal level. Yeah. Like, just as an example, I'm in trouble or my health is in trouble. Let me see if I can have my country or my tax-paying country or my government cover that, or can they help me? Whereas the proper process would be to see, can I take care of this myself? No. Well, maybe my family can help me. If they can't help me, maybe my community around me, my neighborhood could help me. Maybe people who actually know me could help me. And if not them, then maybe, out from there, then in the same way of expecting rights from another, a group that's huge compared to a group that's localized. I think right alongside that is the idea of like my responsibility. I could protest and scream at the sky for my whole life long about like climate change or about like global issues or about injustices even, or whatever it is. but the only way I can actually affect those things is in my own action. I am this conscious being inside of this body in this moment in time and space. And this is where my influence is. I have now and here, right?
Yep.
And so yeah, I think that's such a key thing that you're mentioning. Just the idea of start with your own room, start with your own health. Like you said, the suffering of the world crushes all of us, and it will in some ways, and in some places, at different times, our health will go, people we love will go, and eventually we'll all be gone, right? 100 years from now, hundreds of years from now, will be a distant memory. But in that, with that suffering, I don't remember exactly where I don't remember exactly what you brought up when you were talking about that, how the world is like, it's gonna bring so much suffering. It's gonna crush so many of us. But like,
did I say that? I think you said that. What did I say about that?
Oh, you said something like it will, you just said, okay, I kind of interpreted what you said. You said something like, the world, some people just get crushed by like the difficulties of the world. And then I thought,
or like immobilized,
right. Yeah. And then I thought, well, we're actually all going to get crushed by that eventually. But it's just a matter of like, it's a matter of that in between, right?
So the idea, maybe it's like, what's the guy's name in Braveheart? William Wallace. What he says, it's like this constantly rings through my ears. It's like all men die, but not all men truly live. It's like kind of the idea you're getting at. It's like,
yeah, a little bit. It's a little bit that, and it's also this. Let me give an analogy. I think a good analogy would be like the orphan crisis. Think, yes, this child who has no parents, they're going to die eventually. And so does that mean that they don't deserve to have a fulfilling life? And do they, like, isn't it still worth it for me to look at their life and say, I would do anything for them to have a family and to know that they're loved by a mom and a dad, and to grow up and to be, to have a family of their own, to have a well-fulfilled life, as good of a life as we can imagine people having. Wouldn't it be worth it for me to give whatever I can for that child to have that, instead of being in foster care, aging out of foster care, 2 years later, having a 50% chance of, either being dead, on drugs, or in prison?
Yeah, I think that's something
wild like that. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, you could look at it so cynically and nihilistically. In light of the suffering of the world, you could look at it so nihilistically to say like, well, they're all going to die anyway, or it's all going to be for naught anyway, or whatever, however you want to look at it, whether you believe in something beyond that or not, just in terms of this world. Right. But what I'm referring to is like the difference between that life that ends at 20 and the life that is well lived. And like, yeah, they both end, but there's that difference. Is that's all of life. That's everything that we have to contend with. That's everything that everything that we dream for, everything that we pursue, is that difference of like not good life and good life. And either way, in some respects will be crushed either way. But it's like,
welcome to nihilism with Matt and Caleb.
It's not nihilism though, because nihilism is to stop kidding. At right. And that's the key though. The key is, even in realizing the suffering of the world, there's something beyond that that's worth fighting for, and there's something worth living for. Yeah. So I suppose that does justice enough to the point that that I was trying to make with that.
Yeah. Well, and like you're saying, it's totally, I mean, at least for us, it's recognizing that there's suffering in the world and that everybody dies eventually. It's, kind of, if you just go down that road, it ends up in nihilism. But for us, like the whole point of what we're doing here is that you can make it better. Like you don't have to just view the world that way and say, oh, well, it's just pointless or everything's just hopeless. Like, no, there are things worth living for. There are actions you can take that are going to make things better. Like if you act in a certain way, you can take seeing the world, seeing the problems in the world, seeing the issues, feeling the pressures of, levels of responsibility, all those things. And you, in how you think, what you say, how you act, you can actually make a huge difference. There's a lot of power given to people in their free will. There's a lot of choice involved in our lives. And so point of what we're saying is you can take responsibility for yourself and adopt, further levels of responsibility that are going to make it worth it for yourself and also for the people around you. And obviously a huge part of this too, that we shouldn't go any further without recognizing is, for me, the only reason that all those things can be true is because of my faith in God. And I don't think it really makes sense to, how should I say it? It makes sense to still think of it as, seeing what's wrong in the world and saying, okay, well, I can, obviously the only answer is to adopt some measure of responsibility to make that better. And what I would argue so far from my life and what I believe is that the best and only truly eternal way to make things better and to make those decisions and choices is connection with God and a redemption experience where you actually, encounter him, know him, and experience. This is going to lead to a whole, I can just feel it's going to lead to so much more conversation. I don't know if that's exactly where we want to go today, but anyway, maybe we can just leave it at that for now. Is that for us, that's an enormous part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in that, it's like the words adopt responsibility or the mindset of taking responsibility. What I'm trying to say is almost like within the Christian worldview, within the believing in God worldview, the ultimate ideal is to adopt responsibility. And in any other worldview, I think that the ultimate ideal is also to adopt responsibility. And just because even if somebody didn't have the worldview of like everything being ultimately infinitely meaningful, the way that you and I believe because of our faith, we believe that every moment, every action is infinitely meaningful, that every good thing is has meaning. Every good thing that we do, it actually matters, that it matters in an ultimate way, in an eternal way, and that it's counted in eternity. And we believe that I think generally based on experiences that we've had that have told us that there is this other realm of eternality that we kind of coincide with, and we see glimpses of it at times, and we've chosen to believe in that. But somebody who doesn't even believe in that doesn't mean. It's like this, like someone on the far, like a fundamentalist atheist versus a fundamentalist Christian arguing about, yes, the atheist saying, yes, everything is because we're all just going to get sucked into the sun, nihilism. Everything is ultimately completely meaningless. There's zero meaning to any of it. And then the fundamentalist Christian on the other side saying, no, everything is infinitely meaningful. And I would say that you and I fall pretty close to that worldview, or is somewhere in there. But for everybody who doesn't believe, I think there's a perfectly reasonable opinion that is just because everything might not be ultimately meaningful doesn't mean that it's not meaningful. And just because it's not infinite doesn't mean like that suffering in the middle still matters, even for somebody. And I think a way that I'm approaching this question and even a lot of this podcast and the way that I think about these issues is like, I want it to make sense in a way that isn't contingent on my belief in God or my belief in this faith. Like I want my worldview to make sense in a way that isn't completely, hinging on that. And I think in some ways, it ultimately does hinge on that. Ultimately, if Christ was resurrected, it counts. And if he wasn't resurrected, it doesn't count. I think that's fair to say. But I think it's healthy to have a worldview that makes sense, even without that yes, the suffering in the middle still matters. And so,
or the redemption in the middle, the opportunity to make things better in the middle. Matters.
All of the good and bad, all of the everything, every moment of happiness, joy, suffering, difficulty in the middle matters. But mainly the suffering is what I'm thinking about, because I'm thinking the suffering is the thing that's the most undeniable. So it's almost like the reason I'm saying the suffering is almost like it has to work in the worst situation and it has to work for the worst thing. It's kind of like when you learn, when you learn the rear naked choke in jiu-jitsu, even when you learn it as a white belt, you learn not to cross your feet. That's probably not going to matter at white belt, but it has to matter in the times that are the most influential. Does that make sense? Like whatever the situation is, it has to work at the worst moment, and the worst moment is going to be the suffering. And so it's like the future of the world, the future of the world, could end next week, and it could be terrible. People getting shot and killed and starving and eating each other, or whatever terrible catastrophe the world could end in a week, versus which, we both kind of smile about, because honestly, we probably smile about that because it seems so unrealistic despite the last 100 years of humanity. But that could end in a week, or we could go 1,000 years of beautiful humanity, people raising their kids and looking after each other, or thousands of years, whatever it is. I've got my hands on this side of the microphone because I'm still operating in this worldview that isn't totally contingent on God, right? And so what I'm saying is, like, even without things being ultimately meaningful, they're still meaningful. And that suffering that would exist in that place would matter either way.
Well, so maybe part of that is like, because what brought us here is me saying, just to be clear for both of us in how we're approaching this, how we're going about our lives, our faith in Jesus is it's what's leading us forward. But what you're saying is that, even if that's not true for you and you have stumbled upon this podcast somehow, that it's still for you. Like, you don't have to be exactly where we're at to participate in this journey, because the only logical conclusion, no matter what your worldview, is that you need to take some responsibility to move forward in the world. I think that's true, but I'm not even thinking about it in terms of a listener who might not have the same belief structure. I'm thinking of myself when I'm not having that same belief structure, if that makes sense. Not like, oh, in a moment of doubt, let me listen back to this podcast, or in a moment of doubt, I need something to fall back on. It's not that. It's like, a lot of life isn't just the conscious recognition of the infinite. A lot of life is like lived out reality and things that, yes, our faith has to do with every bit of life, but I'm more thinking about myself in terms of like strengthening my own worldview in a way that's not just contingent on experiences that I've had that would, give me intimations of this infinite relationship between me and this personal being who I would consider God, right? Like that, I almost feel like I'm needing something more firm at times to put my feet on than just those experiences. That's not to, I don't quite want to say I need something more firm than God to put my feet on, because that's totally ridiculous. But it's something like, I want to understand it from that secular perspective as well. I want that to be congruent and not always just have to fall back on because the Bible says so, or because my faith says so. I think, I don't know, but I think that's actually something, for me, that's something that I would admire in myself to develop. Okay. So kind of like for your moments of doubt in following Jesus, or for moments where things are really hard and you're like, man, even if what I believe is wrong, like, it still makes sense to be living this way. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, but it doesn't actually come down to like moments. Like one moment I'm in like belief, one moment I'm not in belief. It's more like just the general life that I live. I have this hope for eternality, but I think that there's something I desire in understanding it without being totally contingent on that. And yeah, I don't know, maybe that's totally like faithlessness or unbelief or something like that's actually undesirable. But that's basically, that's the reason that these issues matter to me, rather than just being able to say about the world or about the physical reality or anything like that, to be able to just say like, oh, it's all in God's hands. And that's all I need to do is just worry about,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think it's really important for you to be articulating what you are, because I mean, we're doing this, like we've talked about this, like we're doing this podcast primarily for us. Like I'll be totally transparent with anybody who wants to know that, like the first priority in this is not the person listening. Like we're legitimately on this journey, and it's going to be, great.
And who's even going to listen anyway? Like we don't care. It doesn't matter. It's about us. Absolutely. I'm with you.
And so, yeah, I think it's really important that we're having this real discussion, because I mean, for our own sake, but then also this like real discussion is what's going to be most valuable to somebody, not something that's like super well thought out. And we're like, because we're not coming at this with a message of like, hey, we've got everything figured out, and we're going to break it down for you in this podcast. Like we're doing this for us, and we're legitimately on this journey. And when we talk about these things, we're actually talking about them for real. Like this is meaningful to the two of us. It's not just for someone else. And so I think part of what will happen too is that as we do this, we'll talk to other people, and we'll come back to things later on. And who knows, maybe after a couple of years of doing this, we'll come back and things like you were just saying, and you're like, yeah, I don't know, maybe in me thinking that, like maybe that's faithlessness, or maybe it's not. I mean, that's an important question. And I'm excited to talk with people who are older and wiser and do have more figured out than we do, to get an answer for that and be like, hey, does this actually make sense? Or, is it faithlessness, or how, what am I experiencing? What am I thinking? And so we're here to hash that out, and it's going to be fun. So I'm excited for that. And I'm really glad that you're articulating where you're at with it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. And I feel like whoever ends up following along on our journey, if people enjoy that, if people find meaning in it, that's great. But like you said, these are conversations that we actually have to have. And it's almost impossible to imagine us sitting down and having this conversation if we didn't make the structure of, we're going to do a podcast and talk about this stuff and release it. And now that we have, here we are having this conversation. And just jumping straight back into the depth of, the deep things that we just started straight into. And honestly, like saying the things I'm saying right now feels very vulnerable. Not because someone else might listen, but literally just to say it to you feels like vulnerable. Which I think means that it's meaningful and valuable to sort out. But this is like, it's not even, I don't know. I feel like I'm trying to articulate it, but I don't have the right words for it. It's like part of me doubts my own rationality, if this makes sense. Like it feels like my rationality or the intellect in me that is caring about these issues from a secular perspective, or a perspective that I think should be congruent with the secular, not quite with the secular worldview, but you know what I'm saying, without being totally contingent on my belief in God and things being exactly the way that I believe them to be. I just think I want a worldview that makes sense to people who didn't grow up in the exact way that I did, in the way that you did, in the, thousands and thousands of years of common Judeo-Christian heritage and belief. And here we are in like this massive culture that's given to us. And we're just kind of, almost everybody just kind of falls straight back into it, or goes along with like the culture that they're in, which right now people our age, it's kind of like this slow descent away from a lot of Western ideas, a lot of Christian ideas, and just falling into like Marxism and postmodernism as the generations go, just as a general kind of slide. But I feel like it
doesn't feel slow all the time. Sometimes it feels like really fast.
Yeah.
Although
absolutely.
I guess it's always things that have been building and, and all that. But sometimes it's like looking around, I'm like, how do we get here? Like, what's going on? Yeah,
exactly. It's like an earthquake. Things have been slowly pressing up and pressing up and pressing up for hundreds of years or whatever.
Yeah.
Decades. And then it's like, boom, they just shift. And it's like, wow, this is the new normal. Like right now, exactly what you're talking about. We won't be able to get into this right now, but just like right now in time in the early July 2020, it's like, holy smokes. Like there's this many people who want to take down like Mount Rushmore and who want to like take down all of the statues. That's pretty scary stuff. This is the stuff of nightmares of like decades past, you know?
Did you see? I don't know who it was, but whoever's in charge of making that decision of how it would come down or something, which I'm totally opposed to. I think it's a terrible idea, for the record. But they wanted to they suggested removing it without destroying it. Like they wanted to somehow like cut it out of the mountain or something and like move. I don't know. It was weird. I'm just like, man, the bizarre way that people are thinking about things these days kind of blows me away. But that's pretty unimportant. What's something really important to what we're talking about is, and what I feel like we're in the tension of, is we're living in well, I'm living in a country, and I think you are too. I don't know as much about Canada's founding and all of that, but in the West, I'll just say we're living in societies that were built on Judeo-Christian foundations, those values, that worldview, those ethics that come along with it. But the popular worldview has become, or a popular worldview that's become of the, how should I say? Yeah, in popular culture, that kind of the default worldview has become secular humanism. And so we're trying to live in a society that was built one way, but now this other worldview is starting to dominate that. And so we're in this friction point in our history where these things they don't go together. Yeah. They are not compatible whatsoever. And so we're trying to, and like a lot of people who are our age and, you know, have grown up in the Western world, whether you like it or not, you grew up in a country that has these values and it's set up to work that way. It's a lot of the laws, like the US Constitution. I mean, you can't make any sense of how that's written without understanding that Judeo-Christian worldview is how that was shaped. But so now we have this other worldview that's colliding and where people are trying to mesh them together and kind of live in the structure of what was built, but then also like live in kind of a different way in a different worldview that doesn't make sense. And so now we have all of these, people wanting to change things, and that's scary to a lot of Marxism. People. And then there's the other component of like, you know, some people who have moved way past secular humanism and are on the spectrum. And now we're talking about this like cultural Marxism, and there's a lot of things going on right now. So we have a lot to sort through. I'm excited to, you know, we can talk about it more now, but what I'm really, really excited for this podcast is to have conversations with people who are a little bit older than us and have seen, you know, just more of the history of these things shifting.
People who are paying attention.
Also, who've been paying attention for decades, you know, and can also speak to where we go from here and how to actually behave in the day that we live in.
Yeah, exactly. And how to fight for the worldview that we know is correct. It's so interesting. Let me take that one idea further. I think I heard something that Friedrich Nietzsche said, which was Christianity. I wish I knew the exact quote, but the paraphrase is, Christianity did such a good job of developing the idea of the individual that it destroyed itself. And that's basically the idea is like Christianity is the reason that we became, the reason that we had the Enlightenment, and the reason that science began a couple hundred years ago, the scientific method, and assuming that the world has a material realm, which was never the way that humans experience things. Humans used to think of things in accordance with their essence. They would look at a tree and they would say, that's the essence of such and such star. And they would look at they would look at a fruit and they would say it has the essence of the sun or whatever. But Christianity developed the idea of the individual, and of individuals being able to take dominion and to understand and to be conscious of the material world to such a degree that it almost like in a way it's like it's led to its own demise. Not exactly. It's not Christianity that's led to its own demise. Christianity made for the scientific worldview Like the whole Enlightenment worldview, the whole post-Enlightenment science, and even the materialism that so many people are basing their secular humanism on, that are basing their Marxism on. All of that is integrated into, the only reason they got there is because of the thousands of years of Judeo-Christian development, right? So I heard that. I think I heard that just today I was listening to a podcast, and I haven't really thought about it very deeply, but I thought it was very prophetic even for Nietzsche to have said that 150 years ago or whatever it would have been. Christianity has done such a good job of developing the idea of the individual that it's leading to its own demise. And, and he went on from there to say that God is dead, not as, some proclamation that God is actually dead. But that the ideas of Christianity and the belief in God has gone from us. And, obviously but he said the next words were, and humanity will never have enough water to wash away the amount of blood.
I feel like we just gonna let that sit there for a second. Man, that is so deep. And I would love to go.
And he said that in the late 1800s. He said that right before the rise of the Soviet Union, Maoist China, and Nazi Germany, decades before it.
Wow. Yeah, when you think about the timing of that, I think you used exactly the right word, prophetic. Absolutely. That's amazing. Was I telling you about the book that made your world? That's the title of it that I read in the last couple months.
Yes.
Man, when you were talking earlier about, you're saying that you, I don't know if this is exactly what you meant. I think you were going slightly in a different direction, but when you're talking about you want an approach to life that makes sense to every worldview, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
It was making me think about this book because it's written by an Indian guy, who basically most of the book is him giving history of how the Bible, that's why it's called the book, The Major World is the Bible. And he's talking about how that has become the foundation for so much of the Western world. And man, it's just undeniable. It's absolutely undeniable that is what happened. And it's really interesting for him, to be born in India, but then to grow up surrounded by Hinduism and other religions, but then see the truth of the Bible that maybe, is not self-evident. That might not be the right way to say it, but is just, you can't see what the Bible has done for the world and not see that that's been an absolutely incredible thing. And I want to do more research. I want to continue on my own journey of understanding more of that history. But, as you look back through, it's like nothing has done more. I mean, you can see when the Bible comes to a place along with Christian faith, everything changes. Whole societies get shaped in a different direction. And, it's really interesting. So I don't know, how we go about that exactly, by recognizing that, but also saying like, hey, there's still room on this journey for you. And I think that as you understand more and you learn more, and you go through your own personal life of experiences, it's almost inevitable that you're going to end up there. But I would never want to, just alienate someone and say like, this is just, it only makes sense if you're coming at it from a Christian perspective or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of that is people, even if people don't believe in, this is the kind of perspective that Jordan Peterson, Brett Weinstein, and those types come from, which is even if you don't believe in the literal story of Scripture or the tradition of Christianity or belief in God, even if you don't believe in its literal manifestation, there's still so much value in whatever it has to offer. If there's value at all, this is something that holds incredible value.
Right.
And I was just thinking, like, for somebody who doubts that our system in the West And I would say America is, I feel like the British Empire and the British system kind of developed and took things from where they were just post, the Enlightenment, to such a better place of understanding the individual, understanding how things should work in like the legal system. And then a bunch of wild Brits just like sailed the ocean and they're like, we're just going to do this and we're just going to do it better and started America. So I feel like all of us like Commonwealth countries have our legal system and our, although it's been falling apart for decades, like it is based in this Christian worldview, but your guys' is so much more explicit. Like your guys' is so much more recent in the writing of the Constitution and you have things actually written out that you guys just thought, let's just take this, let's write out what we believe, what rights humans have and why they have those rights. And it was basically, that was your Constitution. And, yours has been under assault for, hundreds of years as well. But the idea is like, what I was thinking is, as you're saying that, for anybody who doubts that their worldview or that their country or the legal system in the West is based in Judeo-Christian value, it's like the one proof of that is this. The Constitution says that every man is, I don't know what the exact words are, but it's basically every human is equal. Well, why? Who says? And the answer to that is written in the Constitution. Basically, it says, God says, right? And so without that Judeo-Christian structure, even the idea that humans are equal, or the idea that we have rights, or the idea that we have a right to pursue happiness, which I think is in today's language means so much less than it would have when it was written. But the pursuit of happiness and the ownership of property, like these things are considered rights that need to be protected based on your legal system. But without the Judeo-Christian worldview, if we are just secular, if we are just, monkeys fighting over power, none of that stuff is real. There's not actual equality. There's no reason to consider one person equal to another. It's just, it all ends up being about power, who can impose their power on who, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to go back. This is backtracking a long ways, but I feel like it's something important that we should dig into more, just with this being the first episode and, even for our own sake, just kind of getting this out of the way at the beginning. But, a major idea behind doing this and calling it Adopt Responsibility is, like we were talking about earlier, describing these layers of responsibility. And so I was just going to ask you, and maybe you can talk more into, why does it have to be that progression? If somebody's, I don't know, if somebody is coming into this conversations, and let's just use like climate, since it's a little bit less, emotionalized right now. How, if somebody sees that and they're like, man, this is a major problem. Like I need to change that. We need to change that. Like we need to make the world a better place. We need to figure out how to stop the climate from warming and how to, not have the planet be burning up in like 100 years or 10 years, depending on who you talk to. Why does it have to be, why can't you just tackle that issue? Like, cause what we're saying in the message of this podcast is, hey, start with yourself. Like we had this when we showed up to DTS. I think it was Brian Brent who is the first place that I heard it. He's saying, I think his phrase was something like, revivalists have to make their bed in the morning or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
The idea of like, if you want to go out and make change in the world, you have
start with your room.
You got to start with your room. And this is the same idea that Jordan Peterson has put forth and has changed so many people's lives with is, before you seek to make change in the world, set your own house in perfect order. And, I was just going to ask you, this is a central message to what this podcast is all about. And so why does it have to be this way?
Yeah, I feel like the answer is not that profound, and it's totally comprehensively answers your question. Is The reason is because, okay, there's kind of two sides to it. The reason is because you're not competent enough for that issue and you don't have the right to face that issue. I would say those are the two reasons. And the only way to become competent enough to, say, rule a country is you did a good enough job ruling the state, and you did a good enough job. The reason you got to that place was you did a good enough job ruling your city. And the reason you became mayor was you did a good enough job taking care of these community groups, and you took care of your neighborhood, and people saw that. And the reason that you got there is because you had a family that wasn't going to be crushed under the weight that you've been putting on your own back trying to face these issues. Yeah. So you don't gain the competence to face those issues without starting on the inside. It's like starting a building and just starting with the shell of it. And then trying to work your way down and build the foundation afterwards. You have to start from the foundation. You have to have the solidity inside yourself. For myself, I need to be healthy. I need to, before I start trying to fix my neighbor's house, before I start trying to fix this little cul-de-sac we live in, before I start imposing my will on China's climate policy, like before I have the right to impose myself on those things, can I even have the motivation to make myself physically healthy and remain physically healthy, to eat the right things, to make my body strong, to make myself prepared for, whatever life's going to come? Am I even able to take care of myself? And in a lot of ways, I'm probably not. And it's going to take a lot of work, and it's slow going work. And that's the beauty of it. And I think as you start that journey, it's like you just kind of have your whole world smashed when you realize no matter how much I scream at the sky about these huge issues, that I don't have a right to be doing that. I need to start with myself, and I need to aim local, and I need to aim low. I need to aim at things I can actually accomplish. Here's my domain. My domain is my house. And for a lot of people, they just have their domain is like a bed and a shelf. But whatever it is, here's my domain, and let's make this as good as I can possibly make it. And from there, you can expand outwards. And that's the proper way, because you grow in competence as you go out. And you grow in competence because that is your domain. It's your responsibility. And with that comes the rights of whatever responsibility that has. And so this is such a key part of why we've chosen the words adopt responsibility, and just the word responsibility being such a key to our lives. Every right that anybody has, you can even see this in the way that America was founded in the founding documents. They were so clear that every single legal right had a legal duty accompanying it. And I think it's the exact same thing in life. Every right that we have has a responsibility attached to it. And even though for the last, 50 years, there's been no real conversation about responsibility, the conversation has been rights, human rights, rights of different people groups, rights of different genders, rights of different, a right to universal health care, a right for me to have a house, a right for me to have good food. These are all rights. You don't get to talk about rights without a conversation about responsibility. And the reason for that is because your rights are responsibility. Because if you're going to claim the right to something, somebody's going to have to give that to you, and it's going to be somebody's responsibility to give that to you. And so this is such a key part of the word responsibility. So as I develop from the most localized space outwards, I gain the right I gain the right to actually have the conversation about climate or whatever it is. And I would say that if the world was full of people who were concerned with themselves and who were concerned with being morally virtuous, being concerned with how they were taking care of the environment in and of themselves, we would have a world that was actually taken care of. And this battle of people trying to solve global issues before they've conquered their own demons, it's actually not helping.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes it so clear when you say something like, before I'm gonna go bring the solution to China's environmental policies. Like I have to actually be taking care of my own house or my own neighborhood. Like it's just it's so clear and so obvious when you say it that way. And I think because it's a long journey a lot of the times to become someone who's competent enough to actually make a positive difference, to make changes that you want to see. Like a lot of people think that if they were in those positions of making those tough decisions, or they think they would do the right thing, they think they would put, they'd be able to make policies, and, we're talking about government, but any position of leadership, people think that they would make things better. And most of the time, that's not true. You'd make it so much worse.
That's so
and
true.
I think we have to be so real about that. And, starting with myself, like I want to see tons of positive change in the world, but I have to start by recognizing, like, if I had to be in any of these positions that it feels like are central to actually, have the decision-making power to make the world a better place, like, I'd probably mess it up so bad.
Yeah.
And, this is something I see. I mean, we see this every single time because of, I think it's part of it because we have it doesn't have to be, it's not written into our constitution that it's a two-party system, but in the US, we basically function with a two-party system. And so a lot of time, every single election, if it's a Republican, every Democrat, all the way down to like the weeniest little like college freshman who thinks they know everything about the issues, they're like, they can't believe that dude got elected and it's just unbelievable and he's going to mess everything up. It's like, you have no idea what he even stands for. Be honest. Like, you probably have no clue.
Just stop and write down what you know about that guy.
Yeah. It's like, tell me exactly what you're talking about that's actually wrong with that. And tell me what you do differently. It's like, no, the vast majority of us in our early and mid 20s have no answers for those things. Yeah. And I think it's important to be really, really honest with that and recognize that it is this long journey, most likely. Even unless you're a wonderkind, like, that's great. And maybe you're 25 and you really could, but for the vast majority of people, like, you need such a longer journey of understanding these deep issues, to actually be able to make a difference. And so I think a lot of people shy away from that and they don't want to be a part of that journey because it requires so much of them. Like, I think that's something we've realized so far through our 20s. It's like, this is hard. Like, life is really difficult. Like, it takes a ton of effort and energy to actually, be on a personal journey of growth, to actually become someone competent enough to make a positive influence, even with the best intentions.
It's really hard.
And it's so easy to burn things to the ground.
That's so true. That's so good.
It's so easy to just mess everything up. I mean, the systems we have in place, just look at world history, like the systems we've put in place that have actually worked. I mean, you just think about even democracy as a concept, like how really recent that is, and how in just a moment, in the snap of our fingers, democracies have crumbled and turned into these horrible situations where millions of people lost their lives and suffered incredibly. And so I think, I'm not saying that every single person, is Hitler before they get more educated or before they grow up more.
I hear you.
I think we should all realize, like,
but they kind of are.
But maybe, you might be. I don't know.
It's not even. I feel like I've never thought of this particular point that we're making right now, and I feel like it's actually really important. But it's not even like, oh, you would be Hitler. Like, Godwin's law says that any real conversation descends into what is it? Any real conversation descends into Nazi comparisons inevitably, and we're here. So,
well,
anyway,
guess he was right.
Godwin, right again. The point is, it's not even just about would you be literally Hitler or would you literally be Stalin? The point is, the line of good and evil runs through every person's heart. It's not between one person and another. And so there is a part of me that is Hitler-like and is Stalin-like and is Trump-like and is whatever, not to put him.
Do we just throw Trump in line with those dudes? Dang.
That's not what I meant. I didn't mean,
speaking of throwing our
Hitler, Stalin,
under
Trump.
The bus.
Boom. That's the
those
trio.
Three group of guys that have a ton in common.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Obviously, neither one of us actually thinks that.
No, what I mean is just, you know, Trump right now is so considered to be Hitler of today. He's so considered to be like this figure of like mass, first of all, you know, ego and just mass like destruction and like evil. And somebody told me once, Trump is literally Satan. And Mike Pence is even worse. But like,
wow.
what I'm saying is, let's get away from the Trump stuff. What I'm trying to say is
probably safe.
There's an element of Hitler inside of every person. There's an element of like, we're all humans. He was a human being, and every evil thing that's ever been done has been done by a human being. Yeah. And so this point that I feel like is so important is the reason that Hitler went wrong is because he tried to solve the big issue before he was competent to, before he had the right to. He took this adopt responsibility process of starting with yourself with no ego. Just like you said, it's hard. And the reason it's hard is because you go from like the virtue signaling of like, I want to solve institutional problems has so much ego attached to it. And it's so easy for the ego to be aligned with that and be like, yes, I am moral. See what I put on my Facebook or whatever. Whereas the real process of solving a problem is no ego at all. And it's like, it's hard going work. It's personal work. It's, you just suck it up and you do another day. The alarm clock goes off, you go, you push the weights. Right. And so what I'm realizing in this last 10 minutes of our conversation is like the reason that everything wrong has been done in terms of human evil. I'm not talking about tragedy. I'm not talking about earthquakes and volcanoes and cancer. What I'm talking about is the gulags. The reason that happened is because somebody was trying to solve that problem and they didn't have the right to be. They didn't have the competence to be. They didn't have the moral fortitude to be in that place. And so there they were, and they tried their best to solve it. And they were actually Stalin, and 60 million people got killed because they thought it would be compassionate to take down the upper class people of, you know, the rich kulaks. Let's make sure that those rich people, like let's take them down and maybe we can all be equal. And 60 million people dead later. And, you know, here we are. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, something I was thinking about recently, which is it's such a simple idea, but you know, when you stop and analyze, so many of the most influential people in our society are really old. Like Obama was a really young president, and he was still like in his mid 40s when he was elected.
Yeah, mid 40s, I think.
Not that that's really old, so that's an exception to what I'm saying. But like Trump's like 74. I think something like that. Joe Biden is, you know, who could potentially be the president starting in November, who knows, or get elected. I guess you don't get inaugurated until January, but whatever. Joe Biden could be president, and he's like 80 something. I'm like, man, you know, a lot of these people, it's taken a lifetime of a journey of becoming somebody who can actually fill these shoes and be someone who can competently do these jobs. And for people, you know, and it's happened so much with Trump, obviously there have been crazy criticisms of him, you know, that are, from what I've seen, mostly just based in feeling, not a lot of fact. Like most people don't list off like, oh yeah, like I really disagree with like these 3 or 4 things or even 10 things or however many that
they don't like Trump the person.
That I really, you know, disagree with. It's mostly like, oh, he's a racist, he's xenophobic. It's just like a ton of name calling. And then, to be fair, like the same thing happened with Obama too. It's like, oh, this dude wasn't even born in the U.S. Like, how could this dude be president? It's like, okay, like he was born in the United States. Like you chill out about that. And it's, you know, same thing. It's, you know, a lot of people just get caught up in like they're convinced that they disagree with this person, and it's so easy to say something negative. It's so easy to be critical when you don't have to be the one filling those shoes and making those decisions. And so what I'm suggesting is that for the two of us even, and for a lot of people or whoever ends up listening to this, really stop and consider if you have done more criticizing than learning. That's a red flag, and it needs to stop and needs to change. Yeah. Like if you've done more finger pointing and name calling and participating in yeah, like just criticizing people who are in leadership of whether it's government. We've been referring to a lot about government, or whether just smaller things. If you've been hypercritical of people in your own life, of bosses you've had, or things, really stop and analyze that and realize that you might do even worse than they did.
Mm-hmm.
And for sure, if we're talking about somebody who's president or in some, high up in the United States government, for sure, you would be doing worse than them.
Yeah.
And so it's important to recognize that. And this is good. This is leading us into something else that I want to talk about, which is the general state of outrage that we've gotten to. With a lot of things, it feels specific to politics, and I can give a reason why, but I think it's beyond that. I think it's really how I've seen it. It's with a lot of things. I mean, people just get so offended and outraged by pretty simple things a lot of the time now. And I can even, I'm 26, but I can still remember growing up how it did not feel the same as it did now. And so I'm really interested, I want to have as we have conversations, I want to talk about this specifically with people who are, our parents' age, who can even speak far more into that and see how that progression has gone. But so another key point is recognizing, hey, we're in a cultural time, as in an era of outrage, and what's going to lead the way forward, if we're actually going to make positive changes and see the world become a better place in the future, where we need to start is adopting responsibility. And in those layers, it has to go in that order. It has to start with my own person, with my own family, with my friends, and moving out from there. It is not solving any problems to post, infuriated things on Facebook about topics that you don't understand. And I'm probably guilty of this. Like, I've said some pretty testy things on Facebook. It's hard, man, because it's the normal kind of way of doing things almost. And so it's hard to not participate in. But another encouragement that I have for the two of us and anyone listening is to also stop and analyze where we've been at in our level of criticisms of other people, and how quickly we've just gone from 0 to 100 on the outrage meter, and not really actually stopped to fully understand what's been going on, why people have made the decisions that they have, and how things have gotten to be the way that they are. And instead of just jumping to outrage, choosing to have the mental and emotional stability, intentionally pursuing that. If you already feel like you have that, great, get even more. And if you recognize it clearly, as I'm saying this, if you recognize this as an issue, then, or if you just recognize that it's there, if you don't think it's an issue, then I would just like to propose to you that it is an issue and it needs to be addressed, because people who are going to actually make change for the better in the future going forward, we're going to be people who have done this journey of adopting responsibility. And so, I don't know if you have any thoughts about why that's so important. And just if you have even like personal reflections on how this culture of outrage that's become so normal has played a role in your life, and how you've started to step away from that and to even more deeply step into the journey of adopting responsibility.
The first thing I'm thinking is that it seems, this is only the thoughts I'm having as you're speaking right now. I haven't thought this through. And I think something extremely valuable would be, with all the people who we talk to, people who we admire, people who we think could give some sort of direction in the questions of life. I think it's going to be really helpful to ask them, have you been paying attention? And why do you think that the world is a world of social outrage the way it is right now? I think that's such a valuable question to answer. I don't feel like I have an answer, but the thing that's coming to mind as you're speaking this is, it seems like an outgrowth of postmodernism / Marxism. And let's just define some terms, because I know that a few years ago, these are all terms that I've been that I didn't grow up with. I didn't grow up understanding. Marxism, let's just be very simple. Marxism is kind of like a secular materialist worldview that which is very based on economics that basically developed from Karl Marx in the mid to late 1800s. He had ideas that he wrote with Joseph Engel, which were the world. I would say Marxism essentially is, let's separate the world into groups based on their economic status. And then he takes that and he says, now that we have the groups of people at the top, in the middle, and the bottom, let's equalize that, and let's take from the top, let's give to the bottom. And
because they will inevitably always be struggling against each other for power. So let's make it
exactly. And exactly. And then postmodernism came around in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and Rousseau actually wrote that he believed his own mindset, his own postmodern philosophy. He's probably like the world's leading postmodern philosopher. I mean, that's probably really debatable, but in my mind, he's like the picture head of postmodernism. He wrote,
at the very least, a figure that stands out prominently.
Yeah. And he wrote that he believed that his own postmodernism was an outgrowth of Marxism, essentially, that he was taking Marxism to a further extent. Postmodernism is basically the rejection of any grand narrative. It's the rejection of like the Judeo-Christian worldview, this worldview that we have, that there is this personal being who loves us and who is moral goodness and who interacts with us throughout life. And that this world was, created. I would say worldview is essentially just asking the questions of origin, meaning, morality, destiny. These are like the big questions about life. Any worldview is going to answer those in some way. Postmodernism is basically the rejection of any of those. Postmodernism says, hey, wait, we don't have any reason to believe any one of those, so they're all equally discountable. They're all, we should get rid of all of those ideas because there's no one way of interpreting the world. And that's the idea that Rousseau developed so strongly, was like, you can't look at the world and even the material world. Like, are we people or are we atoms? Do we separate ourselves as like, we are cells amongst cells? Are we people amongst, like, what's the difference between my face and the air next to my face? It's a different accumulation of molecules, but why do we define things the way that we do? And he basically, his conclusion, the postmodern conclusion is, because we don't have any one narrative, because we don't have any one way of defining things, then there's no way to define things. And we're left in complete relativity, like everything being relative, everything being floating without being grounded on anything, right? And so even morality is like, okay, nothing is truly right and wrong. Things are just, some things hurt people, some things don't, but it's not objectively right and wrong. It's just subjectively, given your experience, it might be more wrong for you, and what's true for you is true for you. What's true for me is true for me. So yeah, that's just a quick way to define the terms. And so in the reason I'm defining these is because, and at least defining these out loud so that you and anybody listening can understand the way that I interpret Marxism and postmodernism. The reason I'm saying that is because I think that this outrage world that we live in, it just seems like the outgrowth of a worldview where we don't consider each other as individual beings in a way. We consider, we don't, like, if I consider you as a person who I have to convince or who I have to talk to, and we have to like come to a solution and negotiate through things, then we will have peace. If I don't consider you to be capable of that, if I don't consider you to have that divine essence, which is your consciousness and your logos inside of you, to be able to make sense of the world along with me and to negotiate. If I don't think that you have that, then what ends up is we are only in a power struggle. And just like Rousseau said, and just like Marx said, the world is nothing but a struggle of power, one group struggling for power against the next. And that Marx basically said that we're not individuals, we're actually just groups. And me as whoever I am, male with a beard, with, who lives in this town, You could group me at this level of IQ, and at this age. You could group me in any, infinite number of ways. But what Mark said is basically, you're not actually an individual. You're just a mouthpiece for your group.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the world is broken down that way, and when we have a whole society that's so indoctrinated into postmodernism, I would say through the university system and through the school system, has so much postmodernism in the way that they view the world, then it's the only thing that you have is power. It's just power versus power. And if I don't think that you're an actual individual who I need to talk to, then why would I try to talk to you about it? I wouldn't try to negotiate. I would just try to impose my power on you. And if you think that you're going to have free speech with me and you're going to convince me of something, well, that's just you trying to impose your Christian, white, Western worldview. And I reject that. So shame, shame, shame. I'll interrupt you. I'll protest you or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think what I'm trying to say is this postmodern society that is so common on the globe today, this postmodern worldview, says that there is nothing but power. And if there's nothing but power, then that excuses me to use power against you. And I think that's why the world becomes so outraged of, it's like I need to make this post because I need to add a little bit of power to the side that I think is right, as opposed to I need to negotiate for a common middle ground with this person, which is the Western way traditionally.
Yeah. And I agree with that. And I think another thing that's key to understand in this current cultural state of outrage, is to understand that, like I was saying before, secular humanism has become kind of the default for pop culture, in a lot of ways. And something about secular humanism, I mean, I don't know if philosophers would agree with me defining it this way, but the way I understand it right now is almost like postmodernism, but like a step further. And basically just saying, and from this worldview, you'd say, like, not only can we not just pick one religious system, but really they're all just like kind of not the point. It's not what we really need. People shouldn't be looking to God for answers, whether you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew. You shouldn't, like, that shouldn't be your focus for us to move forward as a society. That's the secular part, is like, it's just us. And the humanism part is we can do this, just us. Like, we can make the way forward. We're headed to this secular humanist utopia because we have what it takes within us to get us there. I just saw yesterday, I guess last Friday, I think it was, Chris Cuomo from CNN. He was on air and he was saying, he literally said the words, we don't need help from above. The answer is within us. And I was like, man, if there's not like a perfect short summary of secular humanism, I was like, that is what it is. And I mean, he's on CNN saying this, and it's so yeah, I think another part of this whole thing is that when you take that, when you lower your eyes away from, like you're saying, grand narratives and transcendent objective truths, whether, whichever ones you think are the right ones, if you're not even looking to that anymore and you've been influenced by this, thinking that there's just a power struggle, then, I mean, if you don't have God, then, I mean, what's kind of like the next level of authority? Like, what's the next highest level of authority that impacts your life in a really drastic way? Government. And so then when you get to that point, then we're just struggling over power in this worldview. I don't think it is, but the highest form of power in our society, which is government. And so politics becomes actually the most important thing. And there's a guy, I would love to do an interview with him. He's come here to Youth of the Mission Kona and taught about some of these issues we're talking about right now. And he said the phrase that politics ends up becoming a lot of people's religion in a secular humanist society. And so I think that's another reason why, especially as it relates to politics, we're in this place where we're so easily outraged because it feels like the most important thing
That's
that
so
we have.
good. That's so true.
And it's not
Yeah.
in my worldview, but if you're someone who thinks it is the highest form of power and it is the most important thing, then of course you're going to get so easily triggered by things, and you're going to be so focused on it. It's going to take over your world in some ways. And so I think that's a huge thing that's ended up contributing to where we're at.
That's so good, because to question their politics is the same as them questioning our theology. For us to question what they think is right in government is to question their God the same way that they would. The equal thing for them to do to us would be to question the existence of the God that we believe in and the experiences that we've had even. And I think that's so good. And even a part of that is, like you said, we have this idea of a being outside of this, material earth that we're here on. And so that becomes God to us. That's the ultimate. But without that, then the next level is government, and the next level in the power. And I think inevitably that highest ultimate ideal, or that highest structure, no matter what your belief system is, whatever you think is the highest structure is your God. And so even if it wasn't government, even if it was your, in some twisted way, like your family or whatever it was, that becomes your God. And I honestly, I think it probably for a lot of people, it is their family, people who don't see the world outside of that. But I think
especially
that's so
over
good.
up there in Canada, get some people pretty secluded in their little bubbles with their family.
I didn't mean it like people who are secluded, though we are all just living on ice. I mean, I'm thinking of like the overbearing mother who doesn't let their child leave because their child is, it becomes like this twisted kind of God, the ultimate of their entire existence. Right. Anyway, the point is, I love what you're saying. I think that's exactly right. It becomes so outrageous because it's like, instead of just debating politics, what used to be, oh, you and I commonly agree upon this structure, which is bigger than us. And we're just having a conversation about how we're going to run the neighborhood, and when the garbage man's going to come in the morning, and the policies of like, okay, I think the world should be run this way. You think the world should be run that way. Without that extra structure that we have agreed upon, then we're left with some people who are trying to point to this other structure. The pro-life issue is a great example. I believe that a child should have the same rights, because that's what God says. That's, that's basically, in a nutshell, that's a lot of people's argument. And then from the other side, the pro-choice side would say, I don't believe in that God, so I don't define things the way that you do, and I can define that life the way that I want to. And so,
that was important.
So yeah, it's like all I'm trying to say is, right now we're in this this attempt, like you said, it's like two worlds colliding, and it's more than two; it's many. It's this multicultural explosion. And the problem is, you can't actually have people live multiculturally. It's literally impossible. The culture is that. So yeah, we have no culture. There is a lack of culture because we're trying to have this diverse multiculturality. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong or there's anything impossible about people from different areas in the world all living together. Yeah. Diversity has strengths in certain areas, but in Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone is like a kind of like a philosophical book. He did a study. I'm kind of going left field here, but he did a study. Basically, he found that people, when they try to live multiculturally, there's no actual positive impact from different cultures or different places in the world all living together. The only differences are that people who live in the more multicultural places, they watch TV more, and it was one other like kind of random negative thing that people do in those multicultural situations. Yeah. I think it was something maybe to do with higher crime in some aspect, but I wish I could remember. Anyway, the point is, like, you can't you can't have multiple cultures living together, because a culture is by definition the thing that we all agree upon.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
maybe a long time ago, America had a very ingrained culture, like say the time of World War II, when everybody was kind of on the same journey and, okay, we're here, we're together, we're America. We agree on the flag. We might disagree on, a lot of different things, but we are together. We are one culture. Today, there's this smash of the Christian worldview and the secular worldview and many different cultures. And it ends up with no culture in a way, right?
Yeah. But it's interesting because like what you're saying, there's a culture everywhere, and it might be a mashup of different things, but it ends up being something that you can define. Like every nation does have its own culture. And so I think that's why it feels like things are so chaotic in some ways, is because it feels like those worldviews are colliding in a way that, I mean, to be fair, neither of us have been old enough to even have been paying attention for very long, but it feels like, in looking back at history, it feels like we're in a place or in a time when those are colliding in a way that they haven't really in America before, or in a lot of the Western world. It's, I mean, right along with what you're saying, I just read this book about John Adams and how he was the defense attorney in the Boston Massacre trial. Do you know about the Boston Massacre?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So I think it was in 1769 or 70. So it was just a few years before America became America.
Yeah.
So the colonials the British troops were everywhere, all around, and they were occupying the colonies and running the show. Basically, it's still obviously a British colony before it had its independence. And tensions were boiling up to the surface for years before the actual war started, the Revolutionary War. But anyway, basically tensions bubbled over in Boston, and this angry mob of people were kind of like had this, I think it was 8 or 9 soldiers with their captain. They kind of like cornered in this spot, and I forget what they're so mad about, but these tensions were just boiling up. They were, obviously huge concerns were taxation without representation, things like that. But in the specific case, I don't remember exactly what led it to this point. Basically, the troops fired shots and they killed, I think, 5 people. So massacre is a little bit misleading, because like way more than 5 people die every day in the United States right now. But the revolutionaries wanted to make this into like a really big story. So they released news headlines in newspapers and things calling it the Boston Massacre. So it's still called that. But anyway, all this to say, John Adams, who's a founding father, second president of the United States, was a defense attorney in this trial. And they held 2 separate trials. The first one was for the captain to determine whether he was guilty of murder of any kind or manslaughter, or what the deal was with him, if he had commanded his troops to fire, if there had been significant like provocation from the mob to actually like force his hand, basically, for the troops to defend themselves. So John Adams defended him. Captain Preston was his name. And then there were 8 soldiers who were on trial together. And I was so blown away. So the way the book is written, it talks about the events of the night of the Boston Massacre.
What book is this?
It's called John Adams Under Fire.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so it goes through the story of what actually happened, and then it goes through actually like the direct transcripts of both of the trials. And I was so interested to see how often God was brought into the conversation in the courtroom. Like, it felt like on like every few pages there was somebody mentioning like how they were appealing to the jury about these men's value as men who are created by God, and also their responsibility as as God-fearing men on the jury to be honest and to fully, I think this was something John Adams was saying. He was appealing to near the beginning of the trial. He was appealing to all the people in the jury, saying, you're God-fearing men, you need to hear all this out. I think some of them were really unfriendly towards the British presence in the United States, but he was still saying he believed so much in due process that he was appealing to them to, on those grounds. And it got brought up, like Moses got brought up, and how under the Mosaic law, if someone was convicted of manslaughter but not of like premeditated homicide, which is first degree murder, that even the Mosaic law, that distinction was drawn. And so John Adams also brought that up literally in his defense of these troops. He was saying like, hey, look back to the Bible, which we all believe in and look to as our like source of morality. He's appealing to that, to all these people in a courtroom. I mean, can you imagine that happening now?
That's amazing.
And he's appealing to that, saying like, hey, look, even back then, like God gave a distinction between premeditated murder and, provoked, like a responsive aggression that ends up in the other person dying. So that's where we get the distinction. And before in America, in British law, that's where they got the distinction from murder and manslaughter. So anyway, that was a little bit of a long explanation, but it's just so interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating to see back then how it's like exactly what you were saying earlier. Is it's like it used to be, hey, we're all functioning on this common ground of like, we believe in this, we believe in the Bible, we look to it as our source of morality, and we have we have this sense of like the fear of God, where we have to be honest in how we're doing this trial, in order to another thing that really stuck out that was on my mind was with perjury. Like the reason, I mean, I think the people still are, but you put your hand on the Bible and you swear that you're going to tell the truth. I mean, it's there because it's a reminder of God sees what you're doing, and if you lie, you are ultimately accountable to Him. And so that, I mean, having that be true
and today,
all the way
it's
back
just like
then,
this old tradition.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's like, I mean, that's the foundation. And it actually like really meant something back then. And obviously to some people it still does. Yeah. But we're in that place of collision where it's like, traditions like that, it's just undeniable where they came from. But now we're colliding with, I mean, what do you do when you take all of that away and you don't have any fear of God and you don't think that you're ultimately accountable to Him? That's going to radically change how you operate your life, and specifically in that situation in a courtroom, for sure.
Yeah, that's really crazy. The thought I'm having is like the rules of the game were defined back then. We all had the rules were defined. This is the game that we play, and it's in alignment with this belief. And once it's almost like they were trying to play chess and they had the chessboard, and then as that Christian structure started to fall apart, and as postmodernism started to tear it apart, it's like the rules of the game began to change. And some people tried to keep playing chess, but all of a sudden people were, instead of just moving moving like chess pieces on the board, all of a sudden they were coming in with like different tools, and then they were starting to play the game in other ways. But the rules of the game were defined back then, like you're saying, even in the courtroom. It was about, and the way that the Constitution was written, it was these truths are self-evident. All men are created equal, endowed with these rights by our Creator. All these things, and that's the basis of all law, all Western law, not just in America. All Western law is based on this idea of our rights being endowed in our Creator. If they're not endowed in God, where are they? Who's to say that you have the rights? Who's to say that I can't take your people group and take all of your money and give it to another people group? Who's to say that I can't find some, seemingly compassionate reason to kill you, So, and that's exactly what happened as the Christian worldview fell apart, and as the not the worldview fell apart, as it lost traction. And I would say as people stopped representing it well, and as people twisted it, and as people tried to do things with it that shouldn't have been done. And then, and as more and more people got hurt, and they just became cynical. And here we are with like this very, man, just dark and cynical world where the hand on the Bible is just this old tradition, which is in a lot of people's minds mocked and held with no regard. And that's what got us here. That's the worldview that got us here. Have some damn respect.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. These would be really interesting things to continue on. I mean, in our conversations as we go, and interviews with other people. I'm really excited to dig in deeper. This would be really good. I know I told you this before, but yesterday was Canada Day, so just wanted to say again, Happy Canada Day. What is that like 4th of July for us? I mean, do you like do fireworks? What's it like? I've never been part of a Canada
we're a
Day.
lot less. Yeah, we're a lot less enthusiastic. Like I said, you guys basically took our ideas and you just made them like awesome. And sometimes I think like,
wait, what do you mean?
I just mean I don't know, all the Western ideas, like
okay. I thought you were saying
ideals.
like the U.S. took Canada's ideas. Like, I don't know about that.
What I'm trying to say is you guys are so much more enthusiastic and just full on with like the 4th of July. We're like this kind of let's pretend to be polite. And anyway, we were meant to have fireworks and they got canceled. So nothing really happened around
for
here.
COVID. Might spread germs.
I don't know why. It was a plan. It got canceled, but that's our little town. Yeah, no, I don't know. Canada Day, it's the same thing. It's like, I think it's the day that we were founded, and I think that was in 1868 or something. The reason I know that is because my dad's grandpa was born 5 years before that. And so that's like only 3 generations, which is a very young country. My dad's grandpa. Yeah.
Wow. So your great grandfather.
Yeah, I was born before Canada. It's because he had his daughter at 76 years old, and she had my dad at 42 years old.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Whoa.
Yeah, it's really elongated.
Whoa. That's kind of mind-blowing.
Anyway, late 1860s, Canada became a country. And anyway, I think we're just a lot less enthusiastic. We have our little, like we're somewhere in between the UK and Canada, I think, on a lot of issues. We're kind of like, we secretly admire you guys, but
between
then
the UK and the US.
Yeah, what did I say? UK
You
and
said
Canada.
between the UK and Canada. Yeah, but I got what you meant. Yeah.
Yeah.
And on the enthusiasm scale, somewhere in between.
Yeah, just on the everything scale. Like we have a lot of like the cynicism of like the Brits, and then we have like kind of like the positivity and the like forthright challenging the world of America. And I've always thought that America is like one step beyond. Tell me what you think about this. America is like one step beyond Canada on all of the like basically all the like awesomeness of America. Everything that makes America America and makes it awesome is one step beyond Canada. And then the next step beyond that is Texas. True or not true?
Yeah, I guess so. We're just talking about general patriotism. That's probably true.
Yeah. Patriotism and just like pride and like being an individual, facing the world, having guns,
Yeah.
Protecting yourself, being strong.
Texas is an enormous state. For sure the stereotype and the overall like feeling of it, I would say that's pretty accurate. It's kind of crazy though with the US. I mean, with these bigger states, it's like you can have lots of territory in the state that fit that stereotype, but then you still have these inner cities that I don't understand how this fully happens, but it's like somehow inner cities just always end up being so different. I mean, I guess it's because a lot of people come from other places. There's a lot more like moving around that happens with cities, but yeah, they tend to just be like, don't really fit the mold, especially Austin. I've heard Austin, Texas is really weird.
Yeah, I hear you. Can I make a suggestion?
That,
yeah, here's my suggestion. I haven't like researched this. My thoughts on why cities end up, let's just say generally politically left and more group orientated is just because they're living in such a big group and, people just living on top of each other. is so, it just puts you in this kind of group consciousness mindset so much quicker than someone living on a ranch, 10 kilometers from anybody else on an old country road in the backwoods of like northern BC or, whatever.
That makes sense.
So that's one thing. But then I think actually a lot of the policies make practical sense to be one way or the other. Take gun control. People who are out in the middle of the boon sticks need to have guns.
Is that a saying?
I just made it up.
I like it.
I was
Let's
like
go with it.
boondocks out in the sticks, out in the boon sticks.
I like it.
Some random person living out in the boon sticks needs to have guns and needs to, because if they call the cops are a long ways away and they don't want, they would like their area of 5 people in their square, like 100 kilometers, they would like each of them to have a gun to take care of themselves. And that's just practically speaking, you can't have cops in an area like that to be there within a few minutes to help somebody. Whereas in the middle of the city, you need the cops to be the ones to have the guns. And you actually want, with this massive group of people, you want none of them to be armed because that just seems safer. So I think there's a lot of practical reasons why policies kind of diverge along city people versus country people. I think people who are living in like where I grew up, northern BC, the skies are so clear. The grass is just pristine. The mountains are beautiful. There's like beautiful snow for half the year. It's just this like pristine landscape. Nobody's around, you're just living in the middle of the wilderness.
Yeah.
We look at something like the discussion on climate change and we just think it's absolutely ridiculous. But somebody living in downtown LA, they are breathing in the pollution on a daily basis. And
they're breathing in the climate change itself.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And so they look up and they think, wow, look at this global issue, because as far as I can see, it's kind of just hazy.
Yeah.
And so I think for a lot of practical reasons,
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I think for a lot of practical reasons, policies end up in city versus country. And that's only been a development of the last, since World War II. Before that, like the 1920s, 1930s, I think it was 80% of Americans lived on large farms. Is that crazy?
Really?
I don't know if it's the 20s, but certainly by the beginning of the 1900s, yeah. Like 80% or 85% of Americans lived on a farm or lived on land. And the cities were
crazy.
the cities were developing, but they were tiny in comparison to where most people lived in on land. So,
wow. Was that, where did you read that? Or did you just hear it somewhere?
I heard it in a podcast. I heard somebody say that, and the person who they were talking to was like, no, that can't be real. That's totally fake. Like, there's no way. And so I looked into it. I don't know what I looked at.
Okay.
I just followed some like YouTube comments or something where people were like, wow, actually, blah, blah, blah. Here's the source. And then I read it. Yeah, this guy got totally mocked on a podcast where he said that and he got totally mocked. And he was like, okay, I was probably wrong. But he was right. So.
Wow. That's a crazy shift. Yeah, I wonder when when that will be exactly flipped. It seems like that's kind of the direction we're headed as cities get bigger and bigger. I mean,
I think it's already flipped, hasn't it? I don't know. I don't know what it's like.
What did you say?
Days.
Like 80-20?
Yeah, it was like 80% of people or 85% of people living on like land back then. Okay. I want to say 1920 or 1929.
Living on land as in like you own your own house on some amount of property, whether it's like big or not.
Yeah, I wish I
don't live in an apartment building or something.
Right. It was more like live in the country versus live in the city limits. It was more something along those lines.
Oh no, I don't think we're there yet. I mean, I have no idea, but it doesn't. I don't think. My guess would be that we're not there yet. It'd be interesting. We should look into that.
BC is basically there. BC is half of us. Yeah, like half of us live in like the Vancouver area, and half of us live in the rest of the province. So if you look at a map, it's absolutely ridiculous. Like we are like something like 4 million people, maybe 5.
But even then, like what you just said, I mean, that's 50-50, not 80-20, right?
Yeah, so it's a huge shift. It's a huge shift.
Oh no, I no doubt there's been a huge shift, but I wonder.
I see what you're saying. When is it? Oh, okay, I see. You're saying when is it going to be 80% of people in cities and 20%? Oh,
yeah, I mean it seems like it would go there eventually, right? If the trend continues. I don't know. I forget the reasoning exactly behind this, but I remember when we visited China a number of years ago, 2016. went to a few different cities, and someone told us that the government has in mind for 80% of the population. I think it was that exact number. I think it's 80% of the population they wanted to live in cities, and only 20%. I don't know if it's because I don't know why that is exactly, but yeah, they were in the process
So
of
get rid of them if they want to.
maybe.
Boom.
I don't know. Wow.
Joking.
Such
Also,
dark,
last night I had a crazy
such dark
nightmare
humor.
last night I had a crazy nightmare about Chinese, like a catastrophe of the Chinese government basically becoming super socialist and destroying the world. It was an end of the world catastrophe, but I only have like 2 more minutes before I got to go, so I can't tell you that dream.
I mean, we're pretty much already there, bro. China's beyond socialist. It's full on communist right now.
Yeah. Okay. I should have said communist. So my dream last night, I have so many of these types of dreams. This is the second dream in a row of like catastrophe and me not being prepared. 2 nights ago, I was in a knife fight, and I was prepared for the gunfight, and I was prepared for the jujitsu, the hands-on, but I wasn't prepared for the knife fight in the middle. Anyway, then last night I had a dream that me, you, Tiger, Blake, basically a bunch of like men who I admire, we were all on the beach, kind of like on a man trip. I literally just said I wasn't going to say this dream, but this is basically how we're going to have to end because I got to cruise in like 2 minutes. Long story short, I went to go pee, and when I came back, across the whole horizon, across the sky, was projected this image of the hammer and sickle encircled by the Chinese flag. And over the horizon came all these like Chinese airplanes, and they started to bomb just like south of us with this city. And they just started to bomb and shoot all these people. And I was like, why aren't we prepared? Why wasn't I prepared? Why was nobody prepared? That was, there's a lot of details in it, but that was basically it. We were all getting killed and we weren't prepared. And that's why we need to adopt responsibility, because catastrophe is coming. Global catastrophe is coming. Galactic catastrophe is coming.
And after that,
personal catastrophe is coming.
Intergalactic.
Yes. That's why we need to take responsibility for being prepared, just to prolong that.
Amazing. What an ending. If for whatever reason you're only hearing the ending of this, please go back and listen to the beginning, because that's where we're actually talking about the real reason. But man,
somewhere in the middle is where we actually hit any like good stuff.
Yeah.
The beginning was quite dark.
Yeah. First 2/3. We'll stick with that. That's the most important part of this. But man, so fun. I think what we just did was lay a really amazing foundation for future conversations, and we've kind of opened this journey in front of us, and it's gonna be really fun. So we'll be back posting recordings of interviews that we have with other people, and also of our future conversations between the two of us. Can't wait.